He's a monster.
The niece of Jessie Dotson, filled with anger. Dotson is serving time on death row for killing 6 people, including multiple family members and children in 2008.
I walked in there, I seen him holding a gun, a revolver. I know what it was. And he was shooting my dad in the face.
Jessie Dotson's nephew, CJ Dotson, was there. He was only 9 years old at the time.
I was his first child victim he started on. Before he went to my brothers and them, he started on me first. So when I looked him in his face, I told him I loved him. He had his pocket knife like this in his hand and was looking at me with, a little tear in his eye, but he had the little evil look on. And he sliced me across the throat.
What's happening, everyone? I'm glad you're back for another exciting segment with Smackers Worldwide. Please like, subscribe, and hit the bell to catch all the new stories. Now enough talk. Let's get into the story. On Saturday, March 1st, 2008, Jessie Sr., the defendant, and their half-brother William Waddell, also known as Fat, went to Cecil's house on Lester Street to watch a University of Memphis basketball game. Ms. Williams and 3 children were also at the house. They could not watch the game because Cecil's TV could not get the broadcast. Jessie Sr. left around 6 p.m. or 6:30 p.m. When he left, he saw Cecil on the porch cleaning his grill and getting ready to barbecue. After that, he did not see Cecil or the defendant again that night and never saw Cecil alive again. William Waddell left Cecil's home between 10:30 and 11 p.m. At that time, Cecil was still alive. When Jessie Sr. arrived at Nicole's apartment on Sunday, March 2nd, 2008, he found the defendant missing, and Nicole was unsure of his whereabouts. Concerned for the defendant's job, Jessie Sr. asked Nicole to tell him to call if he wanted to keep it. Later that evening, the defendant finally called and explained that he hadn't reached out because his girlfriend, Sheila Jones, had hidden his cell phone after an argument. He provided no further explanation for missing work. During dinner, with Mr. Waddle, the defendant suggested picking up Cecil. Still, since Mr. Waddle could not reach him despite multiple calls that day, they decided not to visit the Lester Street home uncertainty. On Monday, March 3rd, 2008, at about 8 a.m., the defendant rode to work with Jessie Sr. They stopped at 11 a.m. because of rain. Later that day, the defendant called Jessie Sr. to say that Nicole wanted him to check on Cecil's house. Ms. Smith, the mother of Cecil's 2-year-old son, was worried because she hadn't heard from him since early Sunday morning. Around 3 p.m. on Sunday, Ms. Smith knocked on Cecil's door, but no one answered. The door was partly open, and the radio was playing, but she did not see anyone or hear any children. On March 3rd, she learned that Cecil hadn't shown up for work, and his family hadn't heard from him either. After trying to call him without success, she contacted Mr. Waddle at work, who advised her to call the police. She called the police in the early evening and waited outside the Lester Street home for their arrival. Officer Randall Davis was the first to arrive at the scene. As he stepped through the front door, a grim reality settled around him. The overwhelming scent of death filled the air. The storm door was closed, but the interior door was slightly ajar, revealing a glimpse of a lifeless foot resting on the floor inside. With a heavy heart, Officer Davis entered the home and was confronted with a tragic sight. 4 adult bodies, later identified as Cecil, Ms. Williams, Hollis Seals, and 22-year-old Shindri Robertson. Each had clearly endured a horrific end, marred by multiple gunshot wounds. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, Officer Davis refrained from checking for vital signs, understanding that the loss of these lives was painfully evident. Officer Davis, along with 2 other officers, continued through the house, searching for survivors and perpetrators, while another officer secured the front door. Officer Davis noticed blood throughout the house, but none of it appeared to be fresh. Officer Davis saw someone in the hallway bathroom and discovered 9-year-old CJ in the bathtub with a knife stuck in his head. Officer Davis first believed that CJ was deceased, but then noticed the child's eyes twitch. After alerting others he had found a survivor, Officer Davis continued clearing the home. In a bedroom on the left side of the hallway, Officer Davis discovered 4-year-old Samario, who was deceased. In another bedroom, he found 2-year-old Cecil II and 5-year-old Cedric, both of whom also appeared to be deceased. Meanwhile, another officer located 2-month-old Sanaya, who was still alive, and carried her out of the house. The officers exited just as the Memphis Fire Department personnel arrived, and Officer Davis informed them that a survivor had been found in the bathroom.
Jessie Dotson is escorted by prison guards to meet us, just feet from where he's scheduled to die.
I'm doing fine, just doing time.
We're Dotson's only visitor since he arrived on death row at the Riverbend Maximum Security Prison in Nashville this March. The only family member he's talked with is his mother, who he calls from death row.
He's kind of hard, but I forgive him. He said I did it, Mama.
At his murder trial, Dotson's mother took the stand, telling jurors he confessed to her after he confessed to police. He told her an argument with his brother led to the massacre.
I did confess, but before I confessed, I also told her that they was trying to make me say that I done it.
Has she said she forgives you, or has she...
Forgive me for what?
Have you guys had any conversation about it?
What is she forgiving me for? You haven't been and done something to be forgiven, right?
So why the children? Why the baby? No, I asked him the kids, and he said it's not me.
After 2 weeks of heartbreaking testimony and gruesome crime scene photos, it took a jury just 90 minutes to find Dotson guilty.
Did you kill your brother?
No, ma'am.
Did you kill any of the people in that house?
No, ma'am.
I think it's very pretty fair to say that I'll never forget this as long as I live.
Broken and bloody boards believed to have been used to beat the children, one as young as 2 months old, were found in the home. It was a crime scene so heinous it brought even the most seasoned emergency workers to their knees.
I smelled the dead body. He turned his head, and the next thing we saw was one of the most horrible things I've ever seen. It was a knife stuck embedded in his skull.
You said you confessed to your mother.
Yes.
How do you confess for something that you didn't do?
I keep telling you. How many times do I have to tell you? I was threatened. Do I have to keep saying I was threatened?
He said, I got something for you. I'm gonna throw your on that 4th floor, and I'm gonna let them kill your. So yes, I confess.
Dotson says he stands by his courtroom testimony that police strong-armed him into confessing. He claims he was hiding under the bed in the home during the murders, but he wouldn't go back through the details of that night, saying his case is on appeals.
It was horrifying. But at the same token, what do you want me to do? There was nothing for me to do.
You could have called police.
Could've, I did.
Why?
Because that's something personal with me, and that's something that I got to live with.
Investigators believe the bodies could have sat in the home for 40 hours before they were discovered. Fox 13 has video showing Dotson at the crime scene the night police were eventually called.
What were you thinking then? You were on the scene the night that police showed up here.
Well, I already knew what happened. I knew my brother then was dead. So, it was, what you mean, what I thought. I already knew.
And so you're telling me that you knew there were kids in that house that were dead and dying, and you chose not to call police?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
And ladies and gentlemen, what's very interesting is there's a cordless phone right here. Why didn't he grab it? Because he doesn't call the police? We're not asking you to call the police. Call an ambulance. How about that?
A lot of people feel that you're a monster.
Well, that's their opinion. People have their opinions. You can't stop people from having their opinions. I think people are monsters too. So hey, it's vice versa. I know I'm not a monster.
I don't even know how you would go about holding a 2-month-old to stab it and to beat it.
On March 7, 2008, police got a call from a nurse at the hospital saying that CJ was awake and alert and that they needed to talk to him. During the interview, CJ said that Uncle Junior, the defendant, was the one who killed his parents and their friends and who stabbed and attacked him and his siblings. Lieutenant Mason informed Deputy Director Armstrong that CJ had named the defendant as the person responsible for the crimes. He told her not to share what she learned until he could listen to the recording of CJ's statement. After listening to the tape, Deputy Director Armstrong ordered the defendant to be taken from the safe house to the Homicide Bureau, assigning Lieutenant Mason and Sergeant Max to interview him. The defendant was under arrest and informed of his rights. He signed a waiver and agreed to talk to the officers. Lieutenant Mason explained they wanted to clarify details and see if he had more information than he provided in his March 4th interview. When asked about gang ties, the defendant said he was a Crip in prison. He then stated that Cecil had once falsely reported him to the police for robbery. Lieutenant Mason asked the defendant to describe what he did on March 1st and when he last saw Cecil alive. The defendant mostly repeated what he had said in his March 4th interview, with only a couple of small differences. He explained that he, Cecil, and Mr. Seals went to Mr. Hill's apartment so Mr. Seals could get a gun. The defendant also mentioned that when Cecil introduced him to the men in the apartment where they bought marijuana, Cecil called him his bitch-ass brother, who just got out of prison. Lieutenant Mason observed that the defendant frowned when he remembered this introduction. After purchasing the marijuana, the defendant said that Cecil drove him to an apartment complex to pick up his son, who was not at home. Then Cecil dropped him off at Ms. Jones's apartment. The defendant insisted that he did not go back with Cecil to the Lester Street home. At one point, the defendant stopped talking to Lieutenant Mason and Sergeant Max. Observing the interview, Deputy Director Armstrong decided to enter the room and continue the questioning himself. He testified that he paid close attention to the defendant's body language while discussing the horrific nature of the crimes. The defendant appeared tense, as if he were trying very hard not to engage in conversation. According to Deputy Director Armstrong, the defendant responded to questions with only 1 or 2 word answers and avoided open dialogue. He noted that for most of the time, when he asked a question, the defendant would merely nod or shake his head. However, it was clear that the defendant was doing everything possible to avoid having a more open, back-and-forth conversation.
To have been used to beat the children, one as young as 2 months old, were found in the home. It was a crime scene so heinous it brought even the most seasoned emergency workers to their knees.
I smelled the dead body. He turned his head, and the next thing we saw was one of the most horrible things I've ever seen. It was a knife stuck embedded in his skull.
You said you confessed to your mother.
Yes, ma'am.
How do you confess for something that you didn't do?
I keep telling you. How many times do I have to tell you? I was threatened. Do I have to keep saying I was threatened?
He said, I got something for you. I'm gonna throw your on that 4th floor, and I'm gonna let them kill your. So yes, I confess.
Dotson says he stands by his courtroom testimony that police strong-armed him into confessing. He claims he was hiding under the bed in the home during the murders, but he wouldn't go back through the details of that night, saying his case is on appeals.
It was horrifying. But at the same token, what do you want me to do? There was nothing for me to do.
You could have called police.
The defendant said that when he and Cecil returned to the house, the argument got worse. When Cecil reached for a shotgun, the defendant started shooting with his gun and Ms. Williams's gun. The defendant then tried to get rid of the children because they saw what happened. He claimed he stabbed them with knives from the kitchen drawer. The defendant began to cry and seemed as if a huge weight had been lifted off his shoulders, but he also felt defeated. Deputy Director Armstrong testified that when he asked the defendant more detailed questions about the events in the house, using what he knew about the crime scene, the defendant asked for a lawyer, and the questioning stopped. The defendant was also allowed to talk to his mother, Priscilla Shaw. When she arrived, she went into a room to speak with him. No one else was in the room with them. She held the defendant's hands and asked him what was happening. She wanted to know if the police were trying to blame him. At first, the defendant didn't answer, but when he looked up, he said, "I did it." When she asked, "Why the babies?" The defendant explained that they had seen him. He said that he and Cecil had been arguing all day and that Cecil had a gun. Ms. Shaw asked if Cecil pointed the gun at him. The defendant said, "Cecil, I did not, but he was just talking and swinging it." When Cecil put the gun down, the defendant said he started shooting. He later rode a bicycle to his girlfriend, Ms. Jones's house after leaving the scene. Ms. Shaw testified. I asked him why he did it, and he said the kids saw him. I said, but the baby. He didn't say anything, just shook his head. Then I got up, told him I love him, and I left.
Grandmother Ida Anderson testified at trial, saying the surviving children have questions.
My grandchildren want to know why it happened.
Ida Anderson says they want to know what happened. They want Uncle Jesse to tell them why he killed their parents. They loved him.
I love them too. I still love them. But I didn't kill their parents. You know.
Jesse ever tell you that something had happened to Cecil and the people inside of Lester Street?
No, sir.
But Dotson says his father's testimony hurt him the most. He told jurors the two brothers didn't always get along.
He got up there and I'm like, where'd he get this from? He got up there, I guess they told him what to say. My thing is, if I'm so guilty, why is everybody lying?
The judge says you should never be able to walk the streets again, and your sister calls you the devil. Do you think you're an evil person?
No, ma'am. I know I'm not an evil person.
This is suggestive of like a serrated knife blade.
During his trial, Dotson seemed laid back, even smiling at times. In the end, the jury didn't buy Dotson's story that he was hiding during the massacre, nor did they believe police threatened him to confess. Dotson had no reaction as the judge read the guilty verdict.
We have found you guilty of murder in the first degree of Cecil Dotson, Marissa Williams, Alice Seals, Shindry Roberson, Cecil Dotson Jr. II, and Samario Dotson.
What, I'm supposed to get upset? You know, I'm supposed to be mad.
Let's keep in mind the important motto, stay dangerous. My heartfelt condolences go out to all the victims and their loved ones.